Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the biweekly Hockey Debates podcast. Today, as we do every Thursday, our discussion is going to center around this week in NHL betting, some betting advice, tips on things you might want to put a dollar or two on if you're so inclined. I'm joined, as always, by Sascha Paruk, the head oddsmaker for sportsbettingdime.com, and Hall of Fame hockey writer Kevin Allen of USA Today. We're going to start out by talking about yet another coaching change since we were last year. And John Hynes is out in New Jersey, and there really doesn't seem to be any action in terms of odds on who might replace him long term. Sasha, is that just an indication that the Devils are not in any hurry to get a coach, or nobody cares about the Devils?
I think it's probably a bit of the latter and a bit of sportsbooks not having a good gauge of who it's going to be. So I would expect if these odds do come out that you're going to see a number of candidates with relatively short odds as sportsbooks look to protect their own liability. So they're not going to give you a big price on any viable candidate if they don't have any inside information. And I think that's what's preventing these odds from being up right now. Is there aren't a lot of credible rumors out there about what's going to come next.
And Kevin, we've really not seen any kind of rumblings, in the hockey world about who might be that next coach in New Jersey. It seems like anytime a coach is dismissed, there's instantly that story up on who's going to be the next guy. But Ray Shero's kind of been, look at his history in Pittsburgh, and that he's been a guy that's given coaches their first chance, kind of guys that might not be on the radar of the next job. Is there, you get any inkling on who might be the Devils guy, or are they not in any hurry? Does Nazardine have a shot at keeping this job full time?
Yes, he does. Nazardine is a guy that they like very much, but he's got to perform. Like there's a feeling in New Jersey that this team has underachieved, and I'm not so sure that's an accurate assessment. If you look at that team, I think maybe we just overestimated the impact that the younger players were going to have. And then when you factor in that the Hall situation is kind of probably undermining the progress because everybody's wondering what's going to happen with Taylor Hall. Is he going to be traded sooner rather than later or before the trade deadline? That's probably played the biggest role. But, if you look at those three players, the number one draft picks, Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier and then Taylor Hall, I think they're combined for like 13 goals, and that kind of explains one of the issues that they've had there. But I think they'll give Nazardine a chance to prove himself. If he does, I think they will entertain the idea of extending him. But the guy that probably I would say a favorite because he has history with him would be Dan Bylsma. Ray Shero is familiar with him. He's kind of an offensive guy. I think he'll know what to do with the offensive talent that the Devils had. So, after this season, I think they'll take stock. And, if, Bylsma isn't the Detroit coach, which is also a possibility if Steve Yzerman decides to make a shakeup there. Although I don't know why anybody would really want that Detroit job because I'm not sure it's the next coach that's going to be in line to have a good team, or probably that's going to be the coach after that. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I would say Bylsma certainly is on Ray Shero's radar.
A lot of hockey people looked at the Devils and kind of saw, could they be this year's St. Louis Blues? They had the young goalie prospect in Blackwood. People were, myself included, were looking at him as possibly the next Binnington. They made the big offseason trade. The Blues got Ryan O'Reilly. The Devils got PK Subban in the offseason. They had, a guy in Taylor Hall with MVP next to his name. It seemed like they were a team ready to make a move. Did we just overestimate where the Devils were at, Sasha?
I think to some extent we did. But at the same point in time, I think that this team's record, this team's points is basically under where it should be based on what you'd expect, given how well they have controlled play, given how well, and basically just it amounts to goaltending at this point in time. They're not getting saves when they need to. Blackwood has not been an above average starting goalie. Schneider played poorly enough to get waived, basically, and Louis Domingue's start with the Devils has been atrocious. So if I was in charge of New Jersey right now, I would be looking to bring in someone more defensive-minded, someone like what the Stars did with Montgomery. I'd be bringing in that style of coach. Someone, we were talking before we were on here about how goalies always seem to have career years under Barry Trotz. And when you're having this kind of goaltending issue, I'd be looking at bringing on a style of play that limits high-quality scoring chances. And I think if you can do that, the Devils have a good chance to turn this around. I don't think they're nearly as bad as their record suggests. But at the same point in time, I think you are right that we somewhat overestimated this team coming into the season, given how young they are, and they have the potential to be better than what they've been so far. And I think that they will be better than what they've been so far, but I don't see them any longer as a team that's going to be a threat to the playoffs.
You know, we've all started to think, I know I have anyway, that advanced statistics tell us more than the traditional statistics. But the one traditional statistic that I think really is telling of where a team is at is the save percentage. And we can argue whether or not that's a team stat or a goalie stat. But the fact that the Devils' save percentage is down near 890 says a lot. And I think Sascha's right about, they've got to improve their defensive play and limit those grade A chances. And, he's got to make more saves. Blackwood just has not performed anywhere near the level that Bennington did last season when the Blues. And, boy, I just never really saw the Devils as anywhere near having the potential that the Blues had before last season. The Blues, even though they started poorly and they were in last place, for the season we all thought they were going to be very good. I'm not sure we all thought that the Devils were going to be really good. We thought maybe they had some potential, but we never thought they were going to be very good.
They certainly don't have anywhere near the defensive core that the Blues have.
Yeah, exactly.
Parayko, Bouwmeester, the Blues have arguably the best top 4, top 6 defense in the entire NHL. The Devils, no one ever was arguing that they had anything of that nature.
Speaking of good, everything you hear about John Hines is that he's a very good coach. The Devils players seemed sincerely distraught that they had failed him. It wasn't like Toronto where the players were doing cartwheels through the rink when Babcock was fired. There was certainly some misgivings amongst the Devils players. Is Hines a guy that we're going to see again, and is he a guy that can be a success in the NHL, Kevin?
Yes, for sure. There may be, he'll have to kind of go back, take a half step back, and maybe end up being an assistant coach. You never know. A lot will depend on what vacancies are open and, who the general managers are. But I would say that's probably more likely that he'll end up going back and being an assistant somewhere and then, be in that position when if a head coach struggles, well, he can be a good interim coach because he has head coaching experience, and then he kind of comes back that way. But I think he's still well respected around the league as a guy that kind of knows what he's doing. He's kind of come up all the way through the system. Like he was with the U.S. National Development Program, coaching teenagers, and sort of earned his spurs there when the NHL took note of, hey, those players are really developing under him. And turning out to be great pros. So I think he's a very knowledgeable guy. I think he's a good teacher. I think this was kind of a snowball effect. I think they started poorly. They started to fret about their start. They started to press. And at the very end, I was talking to former NHL players who watched that Buffalo game, and he said, the team quit. And, I'm always disturbed when people say that because players don't really quit. They always compete. But when you say that, I think what he meant to say is that they just sense that, that this team is in such a state of disarray that they expected something big to happen, and therefore they were kind of paralyzed and, weren't playing well. Like that, something had to be done. And the easiest thing to do, of course, is replace the coach.
Okay, we're going to move on now. We're going to talk about some of the latest odds on the awards. We're going to stick to a couple of the big awards, the major ones this week. We're going to talk about the Hart Trophy and the Art Ross Trophy. One obviously is decided by who gets the most points. The other is going to be decided by a ballot. But it seems like the same guys getting the most love for both awards. So we've got Connor McDavid at plus 200 to win the Hart. He's the favorite for that. And you look at the Art Ross, Connor McDavid at Bet Online in the latest odds is plus 225. Again, the favorite to win it. And my bookie has him as the odds-on favorite at minus 120. Yet he's only barely ahead of his teammate and usual line mate Leon Draisaitl. Is McDavid a guy you like for the Hart, Sascha, or do you have someone else in mind?
I loved him at plus 225, and evidently so did everybody else because he's not there anymore. Down to plus 115 at Bet Online, which is almost as short as my bookie, which still has him at minus 120. At plus 225, I came extremely close to pulling the trigger on a very large wager myself, but I tend to just stay away from season-long futures just because I'm risk-averse and everyone has the potential for injury. It's just not something I want to deal with myself. But when he was at plus 225, I saw that as tremendous value. You're talking about sort of a 30% chance that a guy who has won the scoring title twice and currently has the scoring lead and is far and away averaging the most sort of points per game over the last 3 years in the NHL, and you're giving him just a 30% chance to win the scoring race. I saw that as excellent value, and as I said, so did pretty much everyone else out there. And his odds basically were cut in half or improved twofold in the last 24 hours. So I would still take him at plus 115 if I was going to be betting on this. I think that my bookie has it right. I think that there is a better than 50% chance that he winds up as the NHL scoring leader as long as he doesn't get hurt. I don't see Draisaitl beating him, and he has I think it's a 9-point lead on the field. Maybe it's down to 7 or 8 now after last night. So absolutely, I'd still be taking it with plus 115, but plus 225 was the deal of the year in NHL futures.
Let me float this out there. First of all, I think Connor McDavid will win them both, and I think he's the favorite to do so. And I think it's unlikely that he'll be defeated. So I think it's better than 50% in my way of thinking that he's going to win both. Saying all that, I always like to remind people that human beings are voting for these awards. Members of my association, members of the Professional Hockey Writers Association. And if it's close, like if it's, you're trying to make the decision between Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, I'm going to say that the tie will go to the new face or the newer face. Like Draisaitl is a star as well, but Connor McDavid gets more attention. And I think if it's close, that Draisaitl could sneak in there. Just a feeling I have. Now, if it's not close, if it's clear, then I think the writers will take Connor McDavid, and I think that's what's going to happen. I think he'll pull away. But I think if it's close, I think writers will sort of be looking for reasons to give it to him, to get that guy who just lives a little bit in the shadow of Connor McDavid. Not a lot, because I think people all recognize that Draisaitl is an incredible player. But yeah, there's no doubt that Connor McDavid gets more attention.
So I should have been more clear before. What I was talking about was only for the scoring lead. I would be fading Connor McDavid in the Hart Trophy odds. There he was shorter. He was at plus 190 to win the Hart at my bookie, and Draisaitl wasn't even on the board, which was the sportsbook just simply protecting itself. They don't know where to price Draisaitl, so they're not giving you the option of betting on it. And for reasons that will become more clear when we get to our playoff fades, I would not be taking McDavid in the Hart Trophy race because I think Edmonton is going to regress significantly. But at the same point in time, I think he is going to get the scoring title.
No, I for the Hart Trophy like a guy that we haven't even talked about yet. I mean, I'm kind of an old school guy, and I think in the olden days, the people that picked the Hart Trophy had a different kind of perspective than today. It seems like we tend to look more at offensive numbers when we're looking at the Hart Trophy. And I like Nathan MacKinnon because I think the Hart Trophy is about the guy that's the most valuable to his team. And you look at what Colorado did in the month of November when both of his line mates, Rantanen and Landeskog, were missing in action due to injury, and he kept that team going and still winning. And I mean, to me, that's an MVP. they step up when the team needs you and they make a difference. And I think he's just made a huge difference in that team. Now, granted, I look at the Oilers, and if they don't fade like you think they're going to, Sascha, then people like, as Kevin says, new and fresh. And here's a team that's rebounded and right now, is looking like a potential contender. And if that stays the case, then I think that does weigh heavily towards McDavid. But I think if you scratch below the surface and you think back to the day when it was, I'm trying to think of an example of it. You look back at the olden days of the Hart Trophy. There was often guys who won it that weren't necessarily top scorers, but they were guys that if their team didn't have them, they wouldn't be even considered as a playoff team. And I think McKinnon has done wonders for the Avalanche.
Yeah, I think that you're right. My only concern there would be, as Kevin was talking about, it's human beings voting on this award, and they have short memories. And when they are voting, November is going to be so long ago. And as the Avs get healthy, I think that they are going to be an excellent team. Rantanen's already back, and they've looked great with him. Landeskog's going to be back soon. And Colorado is going to be an excellent team, and my only concern there is that the narrative around McKinnon being the one who shouldered this team is going to be too far back in the past. And so the bet that I really like for the Hart Trophy right now is on David Pastrnak. He's at about plus 325. He's currently got a 5-goal lead on Ovechkin for the Richard Trophy. The Bruins have a 14-point lead at the top of the Atlantic Division over the Panthers. And I think the Sabres might be tied with the Panthers at the moment. And if Boston really just cruises to a division title, and they're going to be neck and neck with the Capitals by the looks of things for a top seed in the East and likely the President's Trophy. But I see Pastrnak getting a lot of votes and a lot of love from a Hart Trophy voting block that has skewed towards the East for sort of the last 20 to 30 years, which isn't entirely surprising. So I would be taking Pastrnak right now, in part because, as I mentioned, I think the Oilers are going to fade. And giving the award to someone who's not on a playoff team, foreshadowing, it doesn't happen very often.
And Kevin is back. We were just talking.
I'm back. I had a little power outage. So
you see David Pastrnak as a legitimate Hart Trophy contender?
For sure I do. Yeah, I mean, he's scoring at such an incredible rate, and he's still such a young man, and I think there's a lot of intrigue about him. He plays for a very good team, which means he's not going to fade. The team isn't going to fade. He's on one of the top lines. He has a player that draws a lot of attention playing alongside him, and Brad Marchand. So, I think he's legitimately there. For the duration. And I think the three people we're talking about, the two Oilers and Pastrnak are, my favorites right now.
When we talk Art Ross Trophy, there's already a significant gap between McDavid and Draisaitl and everybody else. Is that gap closable, or are we looking at a two-player race now, Sascha? Can you make a case for someone else? I look at Pastrnak and I just wonder, he doesn't get that many assists, and can he really keep scoring at this pace? And I just don't see him as a legitimate Art Ross contender. And I look at some of the other guys down there. When you're already 7-8 points behind, it's going to be hard to make that ground up unless suddenly McDavid or Draisaitl or both of them stop scoring. And I don't think Connor McDavid's going to suddenly stop scoring.
No, neither do I. I really don't think it is a closable gap, barring injury. He's got a 7-point lead on Marchand and McKinnon, an 8-point lead on Pastrnak. And then right there, top 6, John Carlson, defenseman for the Washington Capitals, who looks like he's running with Norris. But no, I don't think that is a closable gap as long as McDavid and Draisaitl remain healthy. The only person that I would be willing to take a flyer on, but it would have to be long odds, is the one you like for the Hart, which is McKinnon. When he's paired with Rantanen, they can put up points at an extremely high rate. But given the ice time discrepancy between those two and McDavid and Draisaitl, who are basically out there for 22, 23 minutes a night, every night, and are going to have to be if they're going to drag the Oilers into the playoffs, I don't think it's a close game.
The other thing I like about McDavid is that he's always been a stronger second half player. I mean, after the All-Star break, he averages about 1.55 points per game. Before the All-Star break, he's at about 1.3. So he's a guy that pretty on, and that, when he's already getting the points that he's getting, and he's going to get better. And historically, the trend shows that he does get better. I just don't think he can be caught. And the other thing I wonder about the other night, Dave Tippett, Oilers coach, broke up Draisaitl and McDavid, put him on different lines. If he continues to do that, does that hamper Draisaitl if he's not, Kevin, he's not getting the benefit of being alongside McDavid?
Well, here's my theory on that. I think he's experimenting because he's thinking ahead that they're going to make a run at a top player. I think they're going to be in the Taylor Hall sweepstakes. I think they see this team as a team that could be the this year's Carolina Hurricanes or St. Louis Blues, depending on how you view it, a team that can go farther than had been anticipated in the preseason. So I expect Holland will be very aggressive. And I think in their minds, they're thinking, maybe we'll be better off if we split these guys up. If, and that's a big if we can bring in another premium scorer to play with McDavid or Draisaitl.
Unlike you, Kevin, Sascha and I are both Canadians, so we had our Thanksgiving a long time ago, but you had yours last week, and I'm sure you enjoyed the feast. But another benchmark of U.S. Thanksgiving, as we call it in Canada, is the NHL kind of playoff Mendoza line, almost, if you say that. Since 2005, 76% of teams that were in a position to qualify for the Stanley Cup playoffs on U.S. Thanksgiving ended up in the playoffs at the end of the regular season. So it's always kind of the Thanksgiving Day line. Who's below that line that's going to get above it, and who's above it that's going to fall below it? Kevin, pick me a team that you think that's out right now that you think can get in.
Well, I'm going to pick a couple of obvious teams because that's just how I believe. I think the Tampa Bay Lightning are going to find a way to get in, and I'm a bit of a doubting Thomas about the Florida Panthers. As much as we all predicted they would be in the hunt because of Bobrovsky, I don't like their goal differential. I don't like that they seem to give up as many goals as they score, and I believe Bobrovsky will perform at a higher level, but I think the Panthers could fall out and the Tampa Bay Lightning will regain their rightful spot in the top three there in the Atlantic. So that's not so not a major upset, but that's the way I see it. I just can't imagine a playoffs without the Tampa Bay Lightning, not with all that talent.
What about you, Sascha? I know you kind of hinted at the Oilers earlier as a team you think might fade. Are they going to fade poorly enough that they might miss the playoffs?
I think they are. I think the Oilers are going to be on the outside looking in come playoff time. They have an expected goals for percentage, which is the stat I've referenced on here before, that is 25th in the league. They are bottom 5 in Corsi. Mikko Koskinen has a lifetime save percentage that's barely over 900. 37-year-old Mike Smith was sub 900 last year on a better Calgary team. Their goaltending is going to regress from what it's been. This is a 2-player team. That is it. Outside of that, I think this is one of the worst teams in the NHL. They are incredibly thin on the back end. They are giving Oscar Klefbom 25 minutes of ice time a night, and he is not a good defenseman. I'm going to read you off some Klefbom stats here. He's minus 15, and plus minus, we can all agree, it's not the be-all and end-all of defensive stats. But he has a Corsi of 47.2%. And that's with starting 57% of his shifts in the offensive zone. His expected plus minus is 608 out of 772 players. And this is the person who's anchoring your back end. This team is primed for regression, and I think that they are going to fall quite badly, given that McDavid and Draisaitl are already playing basically at their ceiling. If they come down even ever so slightly, it's going to be incredibly bad news for the Oilers, and that is the team in the West that I think is going to fall out of a playoff position. And then in the East, I agree with Kevin to some extent on the Panthers, but the team I'm fading even more is the Buffalo Sabres. I will stake my entire reputation as a NHL prognosticator that Buffalo is not in the playoffs. Some advanced stats on Buffalo. They're 25th in the league in high danger chances. They're getting top 10 goaltending in terms of save percentage, and they're 24th, just one spot ahead of Edmonton in expected goals for. And given that 16 teams make the playoffs, 24th, 25th doesn't sound, it's not sort of unworkable that a team in that range could sneak into the playoffs if they get sort of above average performance in certain areas. But the problem for Buffalo is that basically 5 of the 7 teams that rank below them in these key categories are all in the West. The only teams in the East that are really performing worse than them in terms of advanced analytics are the Red Wings, who I think we can all agree are the worst team in the NHL, and the New York Rangers. So I think you're looking at the 3rd worst team in the Eastern Conference when you're looking at Buffalo, and that is definitely a team that I see being on the outside looking in.
You guys have kind of stolen my thunder, and I would say that the Lightning, one thing I like about the Lightning's chances is they've only played 25 games, so they've got as much as 5 games in hand on some of the teams ahead of them, so they can make up a lot of ground really quickly if they win those games. But Kevin, you say you can't see the Lightning not in the playoffs, but just a couple of years ago they weren't in the playoffs, and we kept expecting that year that they were going to fix it and turn it around. And granted, they weren't as experienced as they are now, and they haven't had as much success as this group has had now. But I watched them play the Capitals the other night, and they had a solid 3-1 lead in the 3rd period. Kucherov banged one off the crossbar, and Washington scored 2 quick goals, tied it up, and won it in overtime. And I know, we're not supposed to think about luck and things like that, but I think there is an element of luck when you're betting on anything. And it just seems like Lady Luck's not on their side and hasn't been on their side since that horrible experience against Columbus in the playoffs last year. And I just wonder if they are just snake bit this year, and it's just not going to turn around for them.
That's Jack Cooper's theory. I talked to him, was now a week ago, and he just said this season has been a stock market correction. Like he said, we had every imaginable piece of luck last season, and this season we've had absolutely none. He says that if you look at scoring chances that they've given up this season, they're much ahead of where they were last year, and yet they're struggling to put together wins, and they had 62. He buys into your luck factor that they simply haven't had the same level of luck. He said last year, as good as Vasilevsky is as a goaltender, he made some incredible lucky saves that this season he's not making. It's not that he's not a great goalie. He just hasn't had the luck of being able to, be in the right place at the right time in a wild scramble in the goal mouth.
Yeah, they led the league in PDO last year and the year before, and if they were going to do that again, it was going to be a massive coincidence. So this is a regression that has been a long time coming.
I think a team I would fade out of the playoffs, and as much as I like them and I think they're on the path to being a good team, is the Vancouver Canucks. I just think they're playing over their heads. They got a lot of young guys, and we've all seen young guys hit that wall, and around the All-Star game in February, that just. I talked to Dylan Larkin recently about it, and he, of course, denied it in his rookie season that he hit any wall, but he was talking about it the other day, and he said it was just astonishing how exhausted he was in that first season when they kind of hit those dog days of February and that, and he said he just felt so sluggish and so out of energy, and he just couldn't get it back. And I think that's pretty common especially amongst guys like a Quinn Hughes who played college where they're only playing maybe 40 games a year. They're only playing on the weekends. Travel's not really that grueling. Larkin was in the same boat coming from Michigan. And you just wonder, some of these younger guys on the Canucks, how is it going to impact them when they get into those, when they get to like game 60 and they're kind of going into uncharted territory in terms of game experience and just weariness and, travel. We've all traveled and we know how much of a grind that can be to have a long flight. But when you're doing that, even though they get to fly on charters and it's pretty much every creature comfort you can imagine, it's still a lot of time in airplanes. I have always found was physically draining. What do you guys feel about the Canucks? Am I off base here, or are they a team that can go downhill?
I think this is a good hockey team that is generating more chances than they're surrendering. The one thing that really concerns me about the Canucks is the goaltending. They are above average. They're 13th in the league in save percentage right now, and I'm not entirely sure that the Markstrom-Demko combo is going to finish the season there. And then up front, they're incredibly reliant on Pettersson and Besser for goals. And those are two very young players. And as you mentioned, as a very long 82-game season progresses, younger players are the ones who are more prone to fading a little bit. So I agree with you there. In a very tightly packed Western Conference, I'd be hesitant to bet on the Canucks to make the playoffs. But at the same point in time, I live in Vancouver and I don't want to bet against them.
Yeah, well, I have them out. As much as I'm bullish on their future. I just don't think it's this season. There's just too many good teams there that are going to find their way back. Too many experienced teams. We wanted to write off the Sharks early on, but somehow they've kind of found their range now, and they're sort of back in the mix. And they've been around the block enough that I think in the end they'll find a way to close the deal and get in the playoffs.
All right. Well, we're going to have to close the deal ourselves because once again we're out of time. Another great week of talking hockey and talking hockey bets. Sascha, Kevin, always a pleasure to join you, and don't forget to join us again next week. And everybody have a great day.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks.